They thought I was senile. They thought I'd forgotten everything. But I remembered it all, especially the night they tried to erase me from my own life. Let me take you back to that courtroom. The air was thick with tension, expensive perfume, and the unmistakable scent of fear. The judge was reading her verdict while my daughter Patricia, 38 years old, wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people make in a month, was openly crying. My son Brandon, 35, with his perfectly styled hair and his smug expression finally cracked, was protesting loudly. But me? I sat there calm, completely serene. My silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, my posture straight, my hands folded in my lap like I was attending a pleasant afternoon tea rather than the trial that would determine the rest of my life. My lawyer slid a stack of documents across that polished mahogany table. $2.3 million in assets. My assets. The empire I built with my own 2 hands, with sweat and tears and 40 years of sacrifice. And now, finally, I was taking back control. But before I tell you how I got to that courtroom, you need to see what they did to me. You need to understand the night that changed everything. 6 months earlier. An upscale restaurant, the kind where you need a reservation 3 weeks in advance and the cheapest bottle of wine costs $200. My daughter Patricia was standing over me, screaming. Actually screaming at her 62-year-old mother in front of dozens of strangers. My son Brandon was laughing. Can you imagine that? Laughing while pointing at me like I was some kind of joke. And my grandchildren? Those beautiful babies I'd raised, taught, loved? They had their phones out filming the whole thing. Recording their grandmother's humiliation for their TikTok followers. That was the night I realized the people I'd sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a pulse. But here's what they didn't know. I was recording them too. Every word. Every insult. Every moment of their true selves on full display. And that brings us back to the courtroom, where the judge was about to deliver a verdict that would prove to Patricia and Brandon that their mother wasn't senile at all. In fact, I was sharp enough to outmaneuver 2 Ivy League-educated children who thought they were so much smarter than me. Today the entire world would know exactly who my family really was. Now before you think this is just some revenge fantasy or that I'm a bitter old woman, let me tell you who I really am. Because my story matters and maybe it'll help someone else out there who's going through the same thing. I'm sitting here in my modest apartment right now telling you this story. Not the big house I used to own, we'll get to that part. But a simple, clean 2-bedroom place that I chose for myself. It's Tuesday morning, 6 a.m., and I'm up watching the sunrise with a cup of green tea in my hands. This ceramic teapot? I brought it with me from Taiwan 40 years ago. It's one of the few things I still have from my old life. I came to America when I was 23 years old. I had $300 folded in my pocket, money my parents had saved for years to give me, and a single suitcase containing everything I owned in the world. That's it. No family here. No connections. No safety net. Just me, my determination, and a dream that America meant opportunity if you were willing to work for it. And let me tell you, I worked for it. While other 23-year-olds were out finding themselves, partying, figuring out their passions, I was working double shifts. Sometimes triple shifts. I cleaned offices at night. I waitressed during the day. I took English classes whenever I could scrape together the tuition. I slept for maybe 5 hours a night and I never, ever complained because I knew that every sacrifice was building towards something bigger. I met David when I was 25. David Chen. He was an engineer, steady and reliable and kind. We got married 6 months later in a tiny ceremony with just a handful of friends. No fancy wedding. No honeymoon. We used the money we would have spent on all that to start our life together instead. And together we built something real. I started a medical supply business when I was 28. Started it from nothing, from our tiny 1-bedroom apartment with a $1,000 loan and more hope than sense. I sold supplies door to door to small clinics, carrying heavy sample cases up staircases in buildings without elevators. I knocked on doors until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. I heard no 99 times just to get one yes. But I never quit. Quitting wasn't in my vocabulary. My business grew slowly at first, then faster. Small clinics became hospitals. One sales territory became 5, then 10, then 20. By the time I was 50 years old, my company was supplying medical equipment to healthcare facilities across 3 states. I had 40 employees. I was doing millions in revenue annually. I wasn't just successful. I was proof that the American dream was real if you were willing to bleed for it. And through all of this I had 2 children. Patricia came first. I was working full-time, building my business and raising a baby all at once. I remember nursing her during conference calls, rocking her crib with my foot while I typed up purchase orders at 2 in the morning. When she was old enough for school, I put her in the best private school I could afford. Actually, let me be honest, I put her in a school I couldn't afford and I worked extra hours to make up the difference. Then came Brandon 3 years later. Another mouth to feed, another future to secure, another reason to work harder. David was doing well as an engineer, but my income was what paid for the private schools, the tutors, the piano lessons, the summer camps, the college application coaches. All the things that would give my children advantages I never had. I paid every single penny of Patricia's law school tuition. Do you know how much law school cost? Over $200,000 for 3 years. I wrote those checks myself, never asking her to take out loans, never making her worry about money while she studied. I wanted her to focus on becoming the best lawyer she could be. For Brandon, I gave him $75,000 as a down payment on his first investment property. $75,000 that I'd saved, that I'd earned, that I handed over because I believed in him and wanted to launch his real estate career. That one property became 2, then 5, then a whole portfolio. I also have 4 grandchildren. Had 4 grandchildren who actually knew me anyway. A 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 12-year-old. Beautiful kids. Smart kids. Kids I used to see every single weekend. I taught them to make dumplings from scratch the way my mother taught me. I took them to museums and parks. I showed up at every school play, every soccer game, every piano recital. They called me Nai Nai, which means grandmother in Mandarin. They'd run to the door when I arrived, hugging my legs, fighting over who got to sit next to me at dinner. But I haven't seen those grandchildren in 8 months now. 8 months since everything fell apart. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. 6 months before that restaurant incident, before the courtroom, before I had to fight my own children for my dignity and my freedom. It was a Sunday evening in early spring, and I'd invited Patricia and Brandon over for dinner at my house. Not this apartment where I live now, but my real house. The house David and I bought 20 years ago in an upscale neighborhood with tree-lined streets and houses that each told a story of someone's version of success. Ours was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a garden I'd tended for 2 decades. Every rosebush, every stone in the pathway, every piece of furniture inside. I'd chosen it, paid for it, loved it. I made David's favorite meal that night. Braised short ribs, stir-fried vegetables, steamed rice, and my homemade scallion pancakes that the kids used to beg for when they were little. The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind you only use for special occasions. I'd even bought a chocolate cake from that expensive bakery Patricia likes. My children arrived separately. Patricia came straight from her law office, still in her work clothes, already checking her phone before she'd even taken her coat off. Brandon showed up 20 minutes late, which wasn't unusual, kissing my cheek and immediately asking what was for dinner. We ate. We made small talk. Patricia told me about a case she was working on. Something about corporate mergers that I only half understood. Brandon complained about a difficult tenant and the contractor who was overcharging him for renovations. I asked about my grandchildren. Patricia said they were busy with school. Brandon said his kids were fine but didn't elaborate. Then, over dessert, Patricia set down her fork and exchanged a look with Brandon. I saw it. I've been a mother for 38 years. I know when my children are up to something. Mom, Patricia said, using that careful tone she probably practices on difficult clients. Brandon and I have been talking, and we think it's time you started thinking seriously about estate planning. Estate planning. Those words landed on the table like a bomb nobody wanted to acknowledge. I took a sip of my tea. Estate planning? I'm 62, not 92. I'm perfectly healthy. Of course you are, Brandon jumped in, his voice a little too enthusiastic, a little too practiced. That's exactly why now is the perfect time to do this. Get everything organized while you're clear-headed and capable. You know, for the future. For the future, I repeated slowly. Patricia leaned forward. We're just thinking ahead, Mom. Dad's been gone 4 years now, and we know how hard that was for you. I corrected. How hard that is. She blinked. Right. What we mean is we want to make sure you're protected. That everything you and Dad built is preserved and passed down properly. I could have ended the conversation right there. I could have said, thank you for your concern, but I've already spoken with my attorney. but something made me push forward. Some instinct told me to see where this was going. I have been thinking about it actually, I said, watching their faces carefully. I've been considering what to do with everything. Their eyes lit up. Actually lit up like slot machines hitting jackpot. That's wonderful, Mom, Patricia said. We can help you with that. I know several excellent estate attorneys. I was thinking, I continued, about donating a significant portion to charity. There's an organization that helps immigrant women start businesses. The Asian Women's Business Initiative. I want to give them about 40% of my estate. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Patricia's smile froze on her face. Brandon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For about 5 seconds nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Then Patricia recovered first because she's a lawyer and lawyers are trained to hide their reactions. That's very generous, Mom, she said carefully. Each word was measured, calculated. But have you really thought this through? I mean, 40% is a substantial amount. Have you considered what that would mean for your own security? For your future care needs? Translation: have you considered what that would mean for us? Brandon wasn't as subtle. Dad would want us taken care of first, wouldn't he? I mean, that's what parents do. They take care of their kids. I looked at my son, this 35-year-old man who owned 4 rental properties and drove a BMW, telling me that his father would want him taken care of first. Your father and I already took care of you, I said quietly. For your entire lives. Mom, we're not talking about, Patricia started. I know exactly what we're talking about, I interrupted. But you're right. I should think it through more carefully. I'll consider what you've said. And just like that, their relief was visible. Patricia's shoulders relaxed. Brandon reached for another piece of cake. They thought they'd talked me out of it. They thought they'd convinced the old woman to see reason. After they left that night, Patricia rushing out to make a conference call, Brandon suddenly remembering he needed to get home, I sat alone in my dining room. The good china was still on the table. The chocolate cake was half eaten. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock David bought for our 20th anniversary. And I realized something that broke my heart. Their concern wasn't about me. It wasn't about my welfare or my future or my security. It was about money. My money. Their inheritance. I'd seen their faces change the moment I mentioned charity. I'd watched the calculation happen behind their eyes. I'd heard the panic in their voices when they realized their mother might give away what they'd already mentally claimed as theirs. If you're watching this and thinking about your own family, your own situation with aging parents or adult children, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is going to show you exactly what you need to watch out for. And trust me, you're going to want to remember these warning signs. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to rush into anything. I wasn't going to confront them or accuse them or start a fight. Instead, I was going to wait. I was going to watch. I was going to see their true colors. Because deep down I hoped I was wrong about my own children. I hoped that what I'd seen in their faces was just a moment of surprise, just a natural reaction to unexpected news. I hoped that the 2 people I'd raised, the 2 people I'd sacrificed everything for, couldn't possibly be as cold and calculating as they'd seemed in that moment. But here's a question I want you to think about, and I want you to leave your answer in the comments below. If someone you loved suddenly came into money or mentioned their estate plans, would your first thought be about their well-being, or about what you might inherit? Be honest. Because what happened next in my story came down to exactly that question. The phone calls started the very next day. Monday morning, 8 a.m., I was barely finished with my tea when my phone rang. Patricia. She wanted to check in and see how I was feeling after our big conversation. She asked if I'd slept well, if I was feeling okay, if I remembered everything we'd discussed. That last question, do you remember everything we discussed? That's when I felt the first real chill run down my spine. I'm 62 years old. I run a successful business. I manage my own investments. I file my own taxes. But my daughter was asking me if I remembered a conversation that had happened less than 12 hours ago. I remember perfectly, I told her. Why wouldn't I? Oh, no reason, Mom. Just checking. You know, sometimes after emotional conversations things can get fuzzy. Fuzzy. She used the word fuzzy. Brandon called that afternoon. Same thing. Hey Ma, just wanted to make sure you're doing okay. That was a lot to talk about last night. Are you feeling clear-headed about everything? Clear-headed. As if I'd been confused. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls came every single day. Sometimes twice a day. Patricia would call in the morning, Brandon in the evening, or vice versa. They'd ask about my day and then somehow, smoothly, naturally, they'd circle back to the same topic. My future. My estate. My plans. And woven into every conversation were these little comments. Mom, did you remember to pay your electric bill? You mentioned it last week, but I just want to make sure you didn't forget. Were you supposed to meet Linda for lunch yesterday? She said you got the day mixed up. I stopped by on Thursday like we planned, but you weren't home. Did you forget I was coming? Except I'd paid my electric bill on time the way I have for 40 years. Linda and I never had lunch plans. Patricia made that up. And we never planned for her to stop by on Thursday. She'd said maybe Thursday and I'd said I wasn't sure I'd be free. But she was creating a narrative. Building a case. Constructing evidence of a forgetful, confused old woman who couldn't manage her own life. And I'm ashamed to admit that for the first few days I questioned myself. Did I forget that lunch with Linda? Did we actually make plans for Thursday? When you're told repeatedly that you're forgetting things, you start to doubt your own memory. That's how gaslighting works, and my own children were gaslighting me. 3 weeks after the estate conversation, Brandon showed up at my door unannounced. He had a folder in his hand and that too bright smile on his face. Hey Ma, I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop these off. He came inside without waiting for an invitation, spread papers across my kitchen table, and started explaining them in that slow, careful voice you'd use with a child. These are medical power of attorney documents. Just standard stuff. Everyone should have them on file. It just means that if, God forbid, something happens to you, if you get sick or hurt and can't make medical decisions for yourself, Patricia and I can step in and make sure you get the care you need. I looked at those papers. I looked at my son. And I saw it clearly, the trap being set piece by piece. I'll think about it, I said, not touching the documents. His smile tightened. Mom, there's nothing to think about. It's just a precaution. A smart thing to do. Don't you want us to be able to help you if something happens? If I wanted to sign medical power of attorney documents, Brandon, I'd have my own lawyer draw them up. Not sign whatever you bring me. His face changed then. Just for a second the mask slipped and I saw frustration. Maybe even anger. We're trying to help you, he said, his voice harder now. We're trying to protect you. Why are you making this difficult? Why was I making this difficult? I'd raised this boy, paid for his education, launched his career, and now I was difficult because I wouldn't immediately sign over control of my medical decisions? Thank you for thinking of me, I said, standing up. A clear dismissal. But I can handle my own affairs. He left the documents on my table anyway. Just in case you change your mind. That night I did something I'm not proud of, but I'm not sorry for either. I started recording our phone conversations. My phone has a recording app and I turned it on every single time Patricia or Brandon called. I told myself it was just insurance. Just in case I needed proof later that I wasn't forgetting things, that I wasn't confused, that their version of events wasn't matching reality. I didn't know then how important those recordings would become. 2 days later, Patricia called with a recommendation. Mom, I was talking to a colleague, she's an elder care attorney, absolutely fantastic, and she'd love to meet with you. Just to go over your options, make sure everything is set up properly. She's doing me a favor by fitting you in. An elder care attorney. Because at 62 apparently I needed elder care planning. I already have an attorney, I told her. I know, but Mom, he's almost as old as you are. No offense, but you should be working with someone who specializes in this area. Someone who understands the latest laws about estate planning and elder protection. Elder protection. The words made me feel ancient, vulnerable, like I was already 1 foot in the grave. But what really scared me was this. Patricia's colleague would be loyal to Patricia, not to me. Any attorney she recommended would be someone she could influence, someone who might subtly guide me toward decisions that benefited my children rather than protecting my interests. I'll think about it, I said again. Her sigh was long and loud. You say that about everything lately. You'll think about it, you'll think about it. Mom, at some point you actually have to make decisions and take action. You can't just keep putting things off. I'd built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I'd made thousands of decisions, big and small, that determined success or failure. And my daughter was lecturing me about making decisions and taking action. That's when I knew I needed my own insurance policy. My own proof that I wasn't the confused, declining woman they were trying to paint me as. The next morning I called my doctor. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. She's been my physician for 12 years. A brilliant woman in her mid-40s who's sharp as a tack and doesn't suffer fools. I made an appointment for a full cognitive assessment. Her receptionist asked if there was a specific concern. I said yes, but I'd explain in person. Dr. Okonkwo's office is in a medical building downtown, the kind of place that smells like antiseptic and recycled air. I sat in her examination room, and when she came in she had that concerned expression doctors get when they think something might actually be wrong. "Margaret," she said, sitting down and pulling up my chart on her computer, "you asked for a cognitive assessment. What's going on? Are you experiencing any memory problems? Confusion? Difficulty with daily tasks?" "No," I told her. "I'm experiencing problems with my children." I explained everything. The estate conversation. The constant calls implying I was forgetting things. The medical power of attorney documents. The recommendation for an elder care attorney. I watched her face as I talked, and I saw her expression shift from medical concern to something else. Understanding and then anger on my behalf. "Your children are creating a paper trail," she said bluntly. "They're building a case that you're incompetent." Hearing her say it out loud made it real. Made it terrifying. "That's why I need documentation," I said. "I need proof, official proof from a medical professional, that I'm perfectly competent. That there's nothing wrong with my cognition. I need it dated, notarized, irrefutable." Dr. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "I'll do a full mini-mental state examination and a Montreal cognitive assessment. We'll test memory, attention, language, visuospatial abilities, executive functions. Everything. And Margaret, I'm going to be thorough because if this ends up in court, I want the documentation to be bulletproof." We spent the next hour going through tests. She asked me to remember lists of words and recall them later. She had me draw clock faces and copy geometric patterns. She tested my ability to subtract numbers, spell words backward, follow complex instructions. She asked me about current events, about my daily routine, about how I managed my finances and my business. When we finished, she sat back and looked at me with something like admiration. "Margaret, you scored better than most 40-year-olds I test. Your cognition is not just normal for your age. It's exceptional. Your memory is sharp, your executive function is excellent, your processing speed is above average. There is absolutely nothing wrong with your brain." I felt tears prick my eyes. Not because I was surprised, I knew I was fine. But because having someone confirm it, having a doctor officially document it, felt like a shield I could hold up against what was coming. "I want it all in writing," I told her. "Every test result. Your professional opinion. And I need it notarized." "You'll have it by tomorrow," she promised. "And Margaret, be careful. I've seen cases like this before. When families start questioning an elder's competency, especially when money is involved, things can escalate quickly. If you need me to testify on your behalf, I will." I left her office with a thick envelope of medical records and cognitive test results. Dated, signed, notarized, official. Proof that Margaret Chen was in full possession of her mental faculties. Insurance. That's what it was. Insurance for the war I could feel coming. The pressure campaign intensified. A week after my doctor's appointment, Brandon showed up again. This time he didn't come alone. He brought a real estate appraiser's report. He spread it on my kitchen table like he was presenting a gift. "Ma, I had the house appraised. Just curious about the market value. Look at this. It's worth $1.8 million. Can you believe that? You and Dad bought this place for $300,000 back in the day." I looked at the appraisal report. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't authorized anyone to appraise my house. But somehow my son had arranged it anyway. "Why did you do this?" I asked. "Because, Mom, you need to think realistically about your future. This house is way too much for you to manage. It's 4 bedrooms, you only use 1. It's got a yard that needs constant maintenance. The property taxes alone are $20,000 a year. It's too much house for one person. I like my house. I know you do, but be practical. What if you fall down these stairs? What if something breaks and you can't fix it? What if?" "Brandon," I interrupted, "I'm 62, not 90. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own home." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. "Actually, I've already looked into some options for you. There's a really nice assisted living facility about 20 minutes from here. Beautiful place. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site. Assisted living? My voice came out sharper than I intended. You want me to move into assisted living? It's just smart planning, Ma. Getting on the waiting list now means you'll have options later. These places fill up fast. And honestly, selling this house while the market's hot would give you a huge cushion for your care needs as you age. As I age. As if I was already on death's doorstep. And where would that money go? I asked quietly. Into my accounts. Or into some trust that you and Patricia control. His face flushed. Why would you say that? We're thinking about you. We're trying to help you. By selling my house. By putting me in assisted living. By taking control of my assets. You know what? He stood up abruptly. I don't know why you're being so paranoid lately. Patricia and I are bending over backward trying to take care of you and you're acting like we're the enemy. Maybe you should think about why you're so suspicious of your own children. He left, slamming the door behind him. And I sat there in my kitchen in the house I'd lived in for 20 years, the house where I'd raised my children and celebrated holidays and mourned my husband, and I felt the walls closing in. The next day, just to see what Brandon was talking about, I visited the assisted living facility he'd mentioned. I didn't tell him I was going, I just drove over and asked for a tour. The woman at the front desk was cheerful and professional. She showed me around with a practiced smile, pointing out the community dining room, and the wellness center, and the engaging activity spaces. But no matter what she called them, I saw what they really were. Institutional hallways that smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables, tiny studio apartments with thin walls, common areas full of elderly people slumped in wheelchairs watching television game shows on repeat. Many of our residents love living here, the woman chirped. They feel so safe and cared for. Safe and cared for. Like children. Like people who couldn't be trusted to care for themselves. There was nothing wrong with the place objectively. It was clean and well maintained. But it was a place for people who needed care and I didn't need care. I was healthy, active, independent. This was where my children wanted to put me. This was their vision of my future. I drove home and sat in my car in my driveway for a long time just looking at my house. My home. The place I'd worked so hard to buy, to fill with love and memories, to turn into something permanent and real. And I knew they were going to try to take it from me. That night I made a phone call I'd been putting off. To Robert Martinez. Robert was an attorney, 67 years old, semi-retired now but still sharp as ever. He'd been a friend of David's years ago and I'd helped his daughter Maria when she was starting her own business 10 years back. I'd mentored her, connected her with suppliers, given her advice that helped her avoid the mistakes I'd made. Robert had told me back then, Margaret, if you ever need anything at all, you call me. I called. Margaret Chen, he said warmly when he answered. It's been too long. How are you? I'm in trouble, Robert. And I need help. I heard him sit up, his voice immediately focused. Tell me everything. So I did. I told him about the estate conversation, the phone calls, the gaslighting, the medical power of attorney documents, the house appraisal, the assisted living facility. I told him about my fears that Patricia and Brandon were building a case to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my assets. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Robert said, Margaret, I'm going to be direct with you. What you're describing is the early stages of elder financial abuse. Your children are systematically undermining your credibility, questioning your competency, and positioning themselves to take control. If they file for conservatorship, they could freeze your assets, force you out of your home, and make all major decisions about your life. Where you live, what medical care you receive, how your money is spent. And you'd have almost no say in any of it. My hands were shaking. Can they actually do that? If they can convince a judge you're incompetent? Yes. And Patricia's a lawyer with connections to judges. She knows how to build a case. She knows how to present evidence. She knows exactly what she's doing. So what do I do? We need evidence, Robert said. We need to document everything. Every conversation, every attempt to pressure you, every instance of them lying about your memory or capabilities. We need to show a pattern of manipulation. Do you have anything like that? I've been recording our phone calls, I admitted. Good. Good. Keep doing that. Also, I want you to hire a private investigator. A private investigator? Margaret, if your children are planning something, they're probably discussing it with each other. We need to know what they're saying when you're not around. We need to catch them showing their true motivations. I know someone very discreet, very professional. Will you let me arrange it? I thought about that. About spying on my own children. About what it meant that I even had to consider it. Yes, I said finally. Do it. And Margaret, the cognitive assessment you got from Dr. Okonkwo, that was brilliant. That's going to be crucial. But we need more. We need to let them show their hand. We need them to reveal themselves publicly, clearly, undeniably. Can you do that? What do you mean? I mean, we might need to set a trap. Give them what they think they want, create a situation where they feel comfortable showing who they really are. It won't be easy. It will hurt. But if we're going to protect you, we need irrefutable evidence of their intentions. I closed my eyes. What kind of trap? I'm not sure yet. But when the time is right, you'll know. And Margaret? I'm sorry you're going through this. No parent should have to fight their own children for the right to control their own life. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time thinking about how I got here. About all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd given, all the dreams I'd had for my children. I'd wanted them to be successful, yes. But more than that, I'd wanted them to be good people. Kind people. People who valued more than money. Somewhere along the way I'd failed at that. Or maybe I'd succeeded too well at giving them everything and they'd never learned that some things, dignity, respect, love, couldn't be bought or inherited. Robert's private investigator was a woman named Lisa Chong. Former police detective, now working private cases. She was in her 40s, unassuming, the kind of person you'd walk past on the street without a second glance. Which made her perfect for surveillance. She'd been following Patricia and Brandon for 2 weeks when she called me with news. They're meeting tonight, Lisa said. A bar in the financial district. High-end place. I'll be there. That night, while I sat in my house pretending to watch television, Lisa was across the city with a high-powered camera and directional microphone, documenting my children's conversation. She sent me the footage the next morning. I almost didn't watch it. Part of me still hoped I was wrong, that this was all a misunderstanding, that my children were genuinely concerned about me rather than concerned about their inheritance. But I pressed play. The video quality was good, clear enough to see their faces, to read their expressions. Patricia and Brandon were sitting in a leather booth, expensive cocktails in front of them. They looked relaxed. Happy even. Brandon spoke first. If she gives away half to some charity, we're screwed. Do you know how much I need for the Miami deal? I'm leveraged up to my eyeballs as it is. Patricia swirled her drink. The foundation idea is insane. That's our inheritance. Dad built that business for US, not for some random immigrant women to waste on failed business ventures. My heart cracked a little more with each word. So what's the play? Brandon asked. We get her declared incompetent. File for conservatorship. I've already talked to Judge Morrison, not directly obviously but through channels. He's sympathetic to families trying to protect elderly relatives from making poor financial decisions. What if she fights it? Patricia laughed. Actually laughed. She won't. She's old, emotional, isolated. She has no friends besides Aunt Linda, and Linda's not going to testify against us. Mom will fold. He always does. She spent her whole life taking care of everyone else. She doesn't have it in her to fight back. And if we're wrong? We're not wrong. Look, we've been laying the groundwork for weeks. Everyone who knows her has heard us express concern about her memory, her confusion, her inability to make sound decisions. We've got documentation. We've got witnesses. We've got her refusing to sign basic protective documents like medical power of attorney. What does that look like to a judge? It looks like a stubborn old woman who won't accept help, who can't recognize her own decline. It's textbook. Brandon raised his glass. To Mom's best interests. Patricia clinked her glass against his. To Mom's best interests. They toasted. They actually toasted to stealing my life from me. I watched that video 3 times and each time it hurt worse. Not because I was surprised, by then I knew what they were planning. But hearing them say it so casually, so callously, hearing them refer to their father's legacy as theirs, and to helping immigrant women as wasting money on failed business ventures, hearing Patricia laugh about how I'd fold, because I'd spent my life taking care of everyone else. That's when I realized I didn't know these people. These adults sitting in that bar plotting against their mother, dismissing her life's work, counting money that wasn't theirs. I didn't raise them. Or maybe I did, and this is who they'd always been underneath the surface, and I just refused to see it. I called Robert immediately. "Did you watch it?" he asked. "I watched it." "I'm sorry, Margaret." "Don't be sorry. Be ready. Because you said I'd know when it was time to set the trap, and Robert? It's time. I'm going to give them exactly what they want. Or what they think they want. I'm going to give them a stage to perform on. And when they show the world who they really are, we're going to have every second of it documented." "What are you thinking?" I told him my plan. It was risky. It would hurt. It would mean humiliating myself publicly, allowing my children to attack me in front of family and friends, enduring their cruelty and contempt while pretending to be the weak, confused old woman they thought I was. But it would also give us everything we needed. A public display of their true nature, recorded and witnessed, that would prove beyond any doubt what this was really about. "Margaret," Robert said slowly, "if you do this, there's no going back. Once you trigger this, your relationship with your children will be over." "Robert, my relationship with my children ended the moment they decided I was worth more to them dead than alive. I'm just making it official." We spent the next week planning every detail. The location, the timing, the witnesses, the recording equipment. Robert wanted everything documented from multiple angles. My hidden wire, ambient room audio, and the inevitable cell phone videos that people always take at family gatherings. I called Patricia first. "Sweetie," I said, making my voice tired and small, "I've been thinking about what you and Brandon said. About the house. About my future. About everything." I could hear her sit up straighter. "Yes, Mom. I think you're right. I think I've been stubborn and foolish. This house is too much for me. I'm tired of fighting. I just want peace." "Oh, Mom." Her voice dripped with fake sympathy. "We just want what's best for you." "I know. So I've decided. I'm going to sign over the house to you and Brandon. I'm going to move to that assisted living place. And I'm making you both co-trustees of my estate." Silence. Then, "Mom, are you sure? This is a big decision." "I'm sure. I'm tired, Patricia. I'm old and I'm tired, and I just want my children to take care of me. That's all I've ever wanted. We'll take care of everything." I could hear the smile in her voice. "The victory. We'll handle all the paperwork, all the arrangements. You won't have to worry about anything. There's one thing, though. I want to announce it properly. I want to do it right with the family present. Can we have a dinner? Next Thursday? Somewhere nice. My treat. I want everyone there. Your Aunt Linda, Brandon's wife, your husband, the grandkids. I want to make it special." "Of course, Mom. That's a beautiful idea. We'll make it really special for you." After I hung up, I sat with my phone in my hands, feeling sick. She'd sounded so happy. So relieved. Not because her mother was finally going to be taken care of, but because she was finally going to get what she wanted. I made similar calls to Brandon, to my sister Linda, to the extended family. Everyone agreed to come. Everyone thought we were gathering to celebrate my wise decision about my future. Only Linda knew the truth. I'd told her everything the night before, shown her the private investigator footage, explained what I was about to do. She'd cried. "Margaret, they're your children." "No," I told her. "They were my children. Now they're just two people trying to steal from me. And I'm going to stop them." The week before the dinner, I went through my house, touching everything. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every room where my real family had lived and loved and built memories. I said goodbye to the version of my life where I was a mother who'd succeeded. Where my children were good people. Where my sacrifices had meant something. That version of my life was ending. And the war was about to begin. The restaurant I chose was called the Meridian. 5-star white tablecloths. A sommelier who could tell you the vintage of any wine by smell alone, and prices that made most people wince. I'd been there twice before. Once for my 35th wedding anniversary, and once to celebrate when my company hit $5 million in annual revenue. Tonight I was renting out their private dining room. Capacity, 20 people. Cost, $3,000, not including food and wine. Worth every penny for what I was about to do. I arrived early, wearing a dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion. Navy blue, elegant, expensive. I'd had my hair done that morning at the salon I usually only visit for special occasions. I wore the pearl earrings David gave me for our 20th anniversary and the jade bracelet my mother gave me before I left Taiwan. I looked dignified, powerful, in control. But I'd practiced looking the opposite. I'd practiced seeming frail, confused, defeated. I'd spent hours in front of my mirror learning to make my hands shake, to let my voice waver, to appear like exactly the kind of woman who needed her children to take over her life. Robert Martinez was already there, sitting at the bar where he could watch everything. He wasn't dressed like a lawyer tonight, just a casual dinner guest who happened to be in the restaurant. No one would connect him to me. But he had his phone out, recording everything from his angle. The wire I was wearing was taped between my shoulder blades, the microphone no bigger than a button, threaded through my dress. Professional grade, the kind they use in actual police investigations. Everything I said, everything said to me would be captured in crystal clear audio. My family started arriving at 6:30. Patricia came first, her husband Tom trailing behind her. She looked stunning. Power suit replaced by a designer dress, her hair swept up, diamond earrings catching the light. She kissed my cheek and I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. "Mom, you look beautiful," she said, and I almost believed she meant it. Brandon arrived with his wife Jessica and their two youngest children, my 14-year-old grandson and 12-year-old granddaughter. The older two had other commitments, which I suspected meant they'd been told this dinner would be boring. My grandchildren hugged me awkwardly. We hadn't seen each other in months, and I could tell they didn't quite know what to say to me. Had their parents been poisoning them against me? Telling them Grandma was getting old and confused? I looked at their young faces and felt my heart break a little more. Patricia's two children arrived separately, 17 and 16, old enough to drive themselves. They both had their phones out before they'd even sat down, already scrolling, already half absent from the real world. My sister Linda was the last to arrive. She hugged me tightly and I felt her whisper in my ear, "Are you sure about this?" I nodded against her shoulder. "Oh, sure." Everyone settled around the long table. I'd arranged the seating carefully. Patricia and Brandon closest to me, their spouses next to them, the children spread around, Linda across from me where she could see my face. The waiters brought champagne. Appetizers were ordered. Everyone was chatting, laughing, relaxed. This was a celebration after all. A family coming together for good news. Patricia kept glancing at me, clearly waiting for me to make my announcement. But I let the appetizers come first. Let everyone get comfortable. Let the champagne flow. I needed them relaxed, unsuspecting. Finally, as the appetizer plates were being cleared, I stood up. My hands were on the table and I let them tremble, just slightly, just enough to be noticeable. The table quieted immediately. Everyone turned to look at me. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," I began. My voice was soft, a little shaky, playing the part. "I know everyone has busy lives and it means so much that you made time for this. Family is everything to me. It always has been." Patricia was smiling. Brandon was leaning forward eagerly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," I continued. "About my life, about my future, about what's important. Patricia and Brandon have been so patient with me, so caring, trying to help me see what's best for me. And they're right. I'm not getting any younger." I paused, let my voice waver. "This house I live in, it's too big. Too much to manage. The business I built, it's time to think about what happens to it. My estate, I need to be smart about planning." You could feel the anticipation in the room. "So I've made a decision. An important decision about my future." Patricia and Brandon were practically glowing. And then I looked directly at them and said clearly, firmly, in a voice that didn't waver at all, "I've decided to sell my house and donate the entire proceeds, all $1.8 million, to the Asian Women's Business Initiative." The smile froze on Patricia's face. Brandon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The room went silent except for the soft classical music playing through the restaurant speakers. I continued, my voice getting stronger. "I'm also restructuring my estate. 60% of my remaining assets will be donated to charity. Various organizations that help immigrant families, women entrepreneurs, and community education programs. Organizations that actually help people instead of just accumulating wealth for wealth's sake." "What?" Brandon's voice came out strangled. "Mom," Patricia started to stand. "I'm not finished," I said calmly. The remaining 40% will be split between various family members including my sister Linda, and yes, some will go to you and Brandon. But the bulk of what I've built, what your father and I created, will go to people who actually need it. People who will use it to build something meaningful instead of just inheriting it. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. Mom, we talked about this. You can't. This is insane. Insane. I repeated quietly. It's insane to donate my own money to charity? Patricia's lawyer mask had slipped completely. You're not thinking clearly. We discussed this. You agreed to let us help you. You called me and said. I said what you wanted to hear, I interrupted. I wanted to see what you do. And you've shown me exactly who you are. Brandon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is bullshit. You're being manipulated by someone. That attorney or that charity or... The only people who've been trying to manipulate me are sitting at this table, I said. Patricia's face was red now. You're clearly not capable of making these decisions. You're confused. I'm perfectly clear, I said. I got a full cognitive assessment 2 weeks ago. Dr. Okonkwo certified that I'm in complete control of my mental faculties. I'm not confused, Patricia. I'm awake. Maybe for the first time in years. This is not legal, Patricia said, her lawyer voice coming out now, cold and hard. You're not of sound mind. You're making irrational financial decisions that don't benefit you? I asked. Is that what makes them irrational? Brandon was pacing now. Do you have any idea how much we've sacrificed for you? How much time we've spent worrying about you? Trying to take care of you? Take care of me? My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. Is that what you call it? Coming to my house with medical power of attorney documents I never asked for? Getting my house appraised without my permission? Trying to put me in assisted living when I'm perfectly healthy? That's not taking care of me, Brandon. That's taking control of me. Jessica, Brandon's wife, was trying to shush him, pulling on his arm. The children were staring, some with their phones out, recording. I noticed that and made a mental note. Good. More evidence. More witnesses. Patricia's voice was shaking with rage. Everything you have is because of us. Because we took care of you after Dad died. Because we've put up with your nonsense, your stubbornness, your... Pie what? I asked coldly. My desire to control my own life. My refusal to hand over everything I worked for to two people who see me as nothing but a bank account. That's not fair. Patricia shouted. Actually shouted in a 5-star restaurant, in front of her children and extended family. We've done nothing but try to help you and you're acting like we're criminals. You tried to gaslight me, I said, my voice steady now, clear. You called me every day asking if I remembered things, implying I was forgetting conversations we never had, creating a false narrative of decline. You brought me documents to sign without proper legal review. You had my house appraised without asking. You researched assisted living facilities for a woman who doesn't need assistance. You discussed with each other, in a bar, thinking I'd never find out, how you'd get me declared incompetent so you could take control of my assets. Patricia's face went white. You're lying. I'm not lying. I have proof. I have recordings. I have documentation of everything you've done, everything you've said. I've been collecting evidence for weeks because I knew that if I didn't protect myself, you'd try to erase me. Brandon was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. You recorded us? Your own children. You were plotting against me. Your own mother. So yes, I recorded you. And I'd do it again. The table had erupted now. My sister Linda was crying. Jessica was trying to calm Brandon. Tom was sitting perfectly still, looking like he wished he could disappear. The grandchildren were wide-eyed, some still recording on their phones, some just staring in shock. And Patricia was trembling with rage. You ungrateful, selfish. She stopped herself, glanced at her children, then back at me. Fine. Give your money away. Give it all away. But don't come crying to us when you're alone in some state facility with nothing. Don't expect us to take care of you when you've given away everything we worked for. Everything you worked for? I said quietly. Patricia, you were 3 years old when I started my business. You were in diapers when I was working 20-hour days. You were in elementary school when I was building the foundation of everything I have. You didn't work for any of this. I did. We sacrificed too. Brandon yelled. We had a mom who was never home, who missed school plays and soccer games because she was too busy with her precious business. And there was the real grievance. Not that I was a bad mother, but that I'd been busy building the empire they now wanted to inherit. I was building a future for you, I said, and I could hear the crack in my own voice now. I was working so you could go to private schools, so you could go to college without debt, so you could have opportunities one never had. I gave you everything. And now you're angry that I want to give some of it away to people who actually need it. Patricia stood up, grabbed her purse. This is insane. You're clearly not capable of making rational decisions. You're being manipulated, or you're sick, or I'm finally seeing clearly, I said. Maybe for the first time in decades, I'm seeing my children for exactly who they are. You know what? Patricia's voice was venomous now, all pretense of concern gone. You're right. You want to see who we are? Fine. We're people who are done putting up with an ungrateful old woman who doesn't appreciate anything we've done. We're people who are tired of watching you throw away our father's legacy on strangers who don't deserve it. We're people who are going to fight this, Mom. We're going to court, and we're going to prove you're not competent to make these decisions, and we're going to get control of that money. Because Dad would want us to have it. Not some charity. Not some foundation. U.S. Your father, I said quietly, would be ashamed of both of you right now. Brandon got in my face then, close enough that I could smell the wine on his breath. Don't come crying to us when you end up alone in some state facility. Don't call us when you need help. You're making your choice tonight, and we're making ours. Good, I said, not backing away. I'm glad we understand each other. Patricia grabbed her 2 children. We're leaving. Come on. Brandon followed, his family scrambling to catch up. At the doorway, Patricia turned back. The entire dining room, because by now our private room wasn't private anymore, people from the main restaurant were watching, went silent. You'll regret this, she said. When you're old and sick and alone and you have no one to take care of you, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that you chose strangers over your own family. I'll remember, I said, that I chose dignity over being controlled. I'll remember that I chose to help people who needed it over enriching people who already have enough. And I'll remember that my children showed me exactly who they were, and I believed them. She left. They all left. Patricia's family, Brandon's family, storming out of the restaurant in a fury of designer clothes and wounded entitlement. The remaining people at the table, my sister Linda, a few cousins who'd sat quietly through the whole thing looking shocked, stared at me. I sat down slowly. My hands were really shaking now, not fake trembling but real shock running through my body. Oh, Margaret, Linda whispered. It's done, I said. It's finally done. I didn't cry in the restaurant. I sat through the rest of dinner with my sister and the family members who'd stayed, people who looked at me with either pity or admiration, I couldn't tell which. I paid the bill, $3,000 for the room, another $2,000 for food and wine that half the guests never ate. $5,000 for the most expensive family therapy session in history. Robert Martinez walked me to my car. He'd caught everything from his position at the bar, just as planned. You got it all? I asked. Every word. The wire worked perfectly. And did you see the kids with their phones? That footage is going to end up on social media within the hour. Good, I said. Then I got in my car, drove 3 blocks, pulled over in a parking lot and sobbed for 20 minutes. Because despite everything, despite the planning, despite knowing what they were, despite being prepared, it still hurt. They were still my children. I'd still spent 38 years loving them, raising them, believing in them. And in one dinner, I'd watched those relationships burn to the ground. But I'd also freed myself. I'd exposed them. And now whatever came next, the truth was out there for everyone to see. The next morning I woke up to 47 missed calls. Patricia had called 15 times. Brandon had called 23 times. There were also calls from Jessica, from Tom, from numbers I didn't recognize. The voicemails ranged from angry to pleading to threatening. Patricia's first message: Mom, we need to talk. You can't do this. Call me back immediately. Brandon's: Ma, what the hell were you thinking? Everyone's talking about this. You humiliated us. You embarrassed the whole family. Patricia's third message was different. Mom, I'm worried about you. I think you're having some kind of episode. Please let us help you. This isn't you talking. Someone's gotten in your head. We can fix this, but you need to call me back. The gaslighting had already started again. Within 12 hours they were trying to spin the narrative. Margaret was sick, Margaret was confused, Margaret had been manipulated by someone. The whole restaurant scene wasn't them showing their true colors. It was their poor, mentally declining mother having a public breakdown. I didn't return any of the calls. Instead I called Robert. They're going to file, I told him. Soon. Probably today or tomorrow. I know, he said. Patricia's already been making calls. I have a friend in the clerk's office who gave me a heads up. Emergency conservatorship petition. They're going to argue you're mentally incompetent based on erratic behavior and irrational financial decisions. The restaurant scene is going to be their evidence. See how confused and hostile she was? See how she made no sense? She's clearly declining. When? Probably by end of business today. They're moving fast, trying to freeze your assets before you can donate anything. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? They can try. Emergency petitions can result in temporary orders while the case is pending. But Margaret, we're ready. We have Dr. Okonkwo's assessment. We have your business records showing clear, competent management. We have the recordings of them plotting. We have the PI footage. We have everything we need. When's the court date? Probably 2 to 3 weeks. Judge will want to move quickly on an emergency petition involving an elderly person. 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks of my children telling everyone who'd listen that their mother was losing her mind. 2 to 3 weeks of legal limbo, not knowing if a judge would take away my freedom, my autonomy, my life. Robert, what if we lose? He was quiet for a moment. We won't lose. I promise you, Margaret, we won't lose. What they did at that restaurant, what they said, they handed us everything. They showed their true motivations in front of witnesses. And once the judge sees the evidence we have, once she hears those recordings, there's no way she'll grant conservatorship. You're sure? I'm sure. But I heard the tiny uncertainty in his voice. Because in court nothing is guaranteed. Patricia was a lawyer with connections. She knew how to present a case. She knew which emotional buttons to push. And I was a 62-year-old woman who'd just publicly given away millions to charity instead of her children. Behavior that, to the wrong judge, might look like exactly the kind of irrational decision-making that warranted protective intervention. By that evening, my grandchildren's videos were online. I didn't see them at first. My sister Linda called me, her voice tight with worry. Margaret, have you been on social media? No, why? The kids posted videos. From the restaurant. Margaret, it's everywhere. I hung up and opened my laptop. Searched my name. And there it was. My 17-year-old grandson had posted a video to TikTok with the caption, "When your grandma announces she's giving away the inheritance and your mom loses it, grimacing face skull #family drama #Thanksgiving came early." The video was shaky but clear enough. It showed Patricia standing shouting at me. It showed Brandon getting in my face. It showed me sitting calmly while my children berated me for wanting to donate to charity. The video had 300,000 views already. The comments were illuminating. The entitlement is insane. It's her money, why do they think they own it? This is literally elder abuse, they're trying to control her. The way they're speaking to her in public. Imagine what they say in private. Good for grandma. Give it all away. But there were other comments too. She's clearly not well, those kids are trying to protect her. Giving away millions randomly is a sign of cognitive decline. The daughter's a lawyer, she probably knows her mom is sick. The narrative was splitting in real time. Half the internet saw Patricia and Brandon as entitled, greedy children. The other half saw them as concerned family members trying to protect a declining parent from making terrible decisions. And that's exactly what they wanted. They didn't need everyone to believe I was incompetent. They just needed enough doubt for a judge to take them seriously. The local news picked up the story within 48 hours. Local family's inheritance dispute goes viral. They interviewed a legal expert about elder financial abuse and conservatorship. They showed clips of the restaurant video. They tried to contact me for comment. I didn't respond. Robert had told me not to engage, not to give interviews, not to feed the media circus. But Patricia and Brandon did engage. They released a statement through Patricia's law firm. Our family is going through a difficult time. Our beloved mother, Margaret Chen, has been experiencing cognitive decline following the death of our father 4 years ago. We are heartbroken to see her being taken advantage of by individuals who see her vulnerability as an opportunity. We are taking legal action solely to protect our mother's interests and ensure she receives the care and support she needs. We ask for privacy during this difficult time. It was perfect. Respectful, concerned, painting themselves as loving children forced into an impossible situation. No mention of the recordings, the PI footage, the systematic manipulation. Just two devoted children worried about mom. The public response to their statement was mixed. Some people called them liars based on the video evidence. Others said the video didn't tell the whole story, that we didn't know what was happening behind the scenes. My phone kept ringing. Friends I hadn't talked to in years, curious neighbors, former business associates. Everyone wanted to know what was really going on. Was I okay? Was I being manipulated? Were my kids telling the truth? I stopped answering. I stopped reading comments. I stopped watching the news. I just waited for the court date and tried to prepare myself for what was coming. Because the real battle wasn't happening on social media or in the court of public opinion. It was going to happen in a courtroom in front of a judge who held my entire future in her hands. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. During that time, Patricia and Brandon's lawyer filed motion after motion. They requested emergency freezing of my assets. Denied, thank God. They subpoenaed my medical records. We fought it with Dr. Okonkwo's testimony. They tried to depose my sister Linda. She told them exactly what she thought of them. They also started calling extended family members, friends, anyone who knew me, asking questions designed to plant seeds of doubt. Have you noticed Margaret seeming confused lately? Has she ever forgotten things when you talked to her? Did she seem like herself at family gatherings? Some people told me about these calls. Others I suspect didn't. And I'll never know what they said, how they answered, whether they defended me or quietly agreed that yes, maybe Margaret had seemed a little off lately. The isolation was the worst part. I couldn't see my grandchildren. Their parents had forbidden contact. I couldn't reach out to Brandon's wife or Patricia's husband because they'd been told I was the enemy. My social circle, already small, shrank to almost nothing as people chose sides or simply avoided the drama entirely. Just me, Linda, Robert, and Dr. Okonkwo. My tiny army against 2 children who had money, connections, and a very compelling story about a mother who needed to be saved from herself. The night before the court date, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed in my modest apartment, the apartment I'd moved to because I'd already sold the house, just to prove I could make my own decisions, and thought about everything that had led to this moment. 40 years of sacrifice. 40 years of building. And it came down to one day in court, one judge's decision about whether I was capable of controlling my own life. At 62 years old, I had to prove to strangers that I wasn't senile, wasn't confused, wasn't being manipulated. I had to prove that wanting to help others wasn't a sign of mental decline. I had to prove that disagreeing with my children didn't make me incompetent. I had to prove, essentially, that I had the right to exist as a free person. And if I couldn't prove it, they'd win. They'd take control. They'd move me to assisted living, manage my money, make my medical decisions, and slowly erase everything I was until I became nothing but a problem to be managed and a bank account to be drained. So no, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there waiting for morning, waiting for my day in court, waiting to find out if Margaret Chen, immigrant, businesswoman, mother, survivor, still had the right to be herself. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and fear. I'd been in courtrooms before. Contract disputes, business litigation, the normal stuff that comes with running a company. But this was different. This time I was the one on trial. Not for a crime but for the right to control my own existence. Judge Helena Rodriguez presided. 55 years old, 20 years on the bench, with a reputation for being fair but absolutely no nonsense. She had sharp eyes behind reading glasses and a way of looking at you that made it clear she could spot a lie from across the room. I'd researched her extensively. She'd ruled on conservatorship cases before and her track record was mixed. She'd granted some, denied others. There was no way to predict which way she'd lean. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. My sister Linda sat behind me in the gallery. A few reporters were scattered in the back rows. The viral videos had made this case newsworthy. And there, on the other side of the aisle, sat Patricia and Brandon with their legal team. Patricia had hired a firm. Not just any firm but Morrison, Chen and Associates, one of the most prestigious elder law firms in the state. 3 attorneys at their table, all in expensive suits, all carrying leather briefcases that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I had Robert. Just Robert in his slightly rumpled suit, with his battered briefcase and his reading glasses held together with tape. David versus Goliath, except I wasn't sure who was David in this scenario. Judge Rodriguez called the court to order. We're here on an emergency petition for conservatorship filed by Patricia Chen Morrison and Brandon Chen against their mother, Margaret Chen. Counselors, opening statements. Patricia's lead attorney stood. His name was Malcolm Ashford, 60 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of polished confidence that comes from winning most of your cases. He'd probably done hundreds of conservatorship. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth as silk, this is a heartbreaking case. We're here today because two devoted children are watching their mother spiral into decisions that can only be described as irrational and self-destructive. Margaret Chen is a woman who built an impressive business empire over 4 decades. She was, by all accounts, a sharp, capable businesswoman. Was past tense. He paused for effect. I clenched my hands in my lap. Following the death of her husband 4 years ago, Mrs. Chen began to decline. Subtle at first, forgotten appointments, confusion about dates, difficulty managing complex decisions. Her children noticed. They tried to help. They suggested estate planning, discussed her future care needs, attempted to provide the support structure that any loving family would provide. He clicked a remote and a screen behind him lit up with bullet points. My supposed evidence of decline. Missed appointment with financial advisor, September 15th. Confusion about family gathering date, September 22nd. Refused to sign basic protective documents, October 3rd. Erratic behavior at family dinner, October 29th. Publicly announced intention to donate $2.3 million to charity, October 29th. Your Honor, donating $2.3 million, the bulk of one's estate, to a charity while shutting out one's own family is not the behavior of a person thinking clearly. It's the behavior of someone who is vulnerable, confused, and possibly being influenced by individuals who see an opportunity to exploit an elderly woman's grief and isolation. Elderly. Vulnerable. Confused. Exploited. Each word was a hammer blow, constructing a version of me that I didn't recognize but that sounded plausible enough to be believed. The petitioners don't want to control their mother's assets for personal gain, Ashford continued, his voice dripping with sincerity. They want to protect her from making irreversible decisions that will leave her with insufficient resources for her own care as she ages. They want to ensure that she receives proper medical evaluation and monitoring. They want what any good children would want, their mother's safety and security. He introduced his evidence. Testimony from Patricia and Brandon about my declining memory, a statement from a friend of Patricia's who'd met me once and thought I seemed distracted, records showing I'd sold my house impulsively without consulting family. Then came their expert witness, Dr. Raymond Foster, a psychiatrist who specialized in geriatric cognitive decline. He'd never met me. Let me repeat that he had never met me or evaluated me personally, but he'd reviewed the evidence and was prepared to offer an opinion. Dr. Foster took the stand, was sworn in, and Ashford began his questioning. Dr. Foster, based on your review of the case materials, do you have concerns about Mrs. Chen's cognitive state? I do, Foster said gravely. He was probably 70 himself, with white hair and the kind of authoritative voice that made everything he said sound like medical fact. The pattern of behavior described, sudden dramatic changes in financial planning, increased isolation from family, defensive reactions to concern, and most tellingly, the desire to give away substantial assets. These are all consistent with possible cognitive decline, potentially early-stage dementia or depression following spousal loss. My stomach twisted. He'd never met me, never examined me, never asked me a single question. But he was sitting there, under oath, suggesting I might have dementia. Could these behaviors have other explanations? Ashford asked, setting up his witness perfectly. Possibly, but unlikely. When we see a sudden shift from sound financial planning to erratic decision-making, especially in someone experiencing major life stress and family conflict, we have to consider that their judgment is impaired. Character witnesses followed. Brandon's wife Jessica, who testified that I'd seemed withdrawn and confused at family gatherings. A colleague of Patricia's who'd met me at one event and noticed I'd been quiet and seemed overwhelmed. Even one of my former employees, someone I'd had to let go 2 years ago for consistent poor performance, who claimed I'd seemed to lose track of things near the end of their employment. They painted a picture. An old woman losing her grip, making irrational choices, stubbornly refusing help, vulnerable to manipulation. They made me sound like someone who needed to be saved. And the worst part? I could see the judge taking notes. I could see her expression, not hostile but concerned. They were getting to her. When Ashford finished, it was Robert's turn. Robert stood slowly, and I saw Judge Rodriguez's eyes flicker to his taped glasses, his worn briefcase. I could almost read her thoughts. David versus Goliath indeed. But when Robert spoke, his voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, this case isn't complicated. It's not about medical decline or protective intervention. It's about money. Pure and simple. It's about 2 adult children who believe they're entitled to their mother's assets and who are willing to destroy her autonomy to get them. Ashford started to object, but Rodriguez held up a hand. Let him make his opening statement, Counselor. Margaret Chen is 62 years old. She runs a successful business. She manages complex investments. She files her own taxes. She maintains her own household. By any objective measure, she is a fully competent adult. The only thing that's declined is her willingness to give her children whatever they want. Robert walked to our table and picked up a folder. Mrs. Chen obtained a full cognitive assessment from her physician 2 weeks before the alleged erratic behavior at the family dinner. She scored in the superior range for her age group. She has documentation of her complete mental competency from a doctor who has treated her for 12 years. He paused, looked directly at Patricia and Brandon. What Mrs. Chen doesn't have is tolerance for being manipulated. What she doesn't have is patience for children who see her as a bank account rather than a person. What she doesn't have is any requirement to consult her adult children before making her own financial decisions. I felt tears prick my eyes. Someone was finally saying it. Finally speaking the truth out loud in a room where it mattered. The evidence will show, Robert continued, that the petitioners began pressuring Mrs. Chen about her estate immediately after she mentioned donating to charity. The evidence will show a systematic campaign of manipulation, gaslighting, and pressure designed to undermine her confidence and create a paper trail of supposed incompetence. The evidence will show that when Mrs. Chen refused to comply, they escalated to this: a legal action designed to strip away her fundamental rights as an adult. He looked at Judge Rodriguez. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen isn't declining. She's finally standing up for herself. And her children are punishing her for it. Robert called Dr. Okonkwo first. She walked to the stand with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you're absolutely right. She was sworn in and Robert began questioning her. Dr. Okonkwo, how long have you been Mrs. Chen's physician? 12 years. And in those 12 years, have you had any concerns about her cognitive function? None whatsoever. Margaret is one of the most mentally acute patients I have. She manages complex medical information, asks detailed questions about her health, and makes informed decisions about her care. She's never shown any signs of memory loss, confusion, or impaired judgment. Did you perform a cognitive assessment on Mrs. Chen recently? Yes, at her request, I performed both a mini mental state examination and a Montreal cognitive assessment. These are the gold standard tests for evaluating cognitive function. And the results? She scored 29 out of 30 on the MMSE. Anything above 24 is considered normal, and her score is in the superior range. On the MoCA, she scored 28 out of 30. To put that in context, many people in their 40s don't score that high. Robert introduced the test results into evidence. I watched Judge Rodriguez study them carefully. Dr. Okonkwo, have you reviewed the medical opinion offered by Dr. Foster? I have. What's your response to his suggestion that Mrs. Chen may be experiencing cognitive decline or depression? Dr. Okonkwo's expression hardened. Dr. Foster never examined my patient. He never spoke to her, never evaluated her, never ran any diagnostic tests. He based his opinion entirely on descriptions of behavior provided by people who have a financial interest in having her declared incompetent. That's not medicine. That's advocacy disguised as medicine. Ashford objected. Judge Rodriguez sustained it, instructed the jury. Wait, there was no jury, just the judge. Instructed Dr. Okonkwo to stick to her own observations. But the point was made. Robert called me next. My hands were shaking as I walked to the witness stand, but not from fear. From rage. From the indignity of having to prove to a courtroom full of strangers that I was a competent human being. I was sworn in. I sat down. I looked directly at Robert. Mrs. Chen, can you tell the court why you decided to donate a significant portion of your estate to charity? I took a breath. Because I came to this country with $300 and a dream. Because other people helped me when I had nothing. Because I built my business to create something meaningful, not just to accumulate wealth for its own sake. And because I want to help other women who are where I was 40 years ago. Immigrants, entrepreneurs, people who just need a chance. Did you consult with anyone before making this decision? I consulted with my financial advisor. I consulted with my accountant. I consulted with my attorney. Everyone agreed it was a sound, reasonable decision that left me with more than enough resources for my own care and security. Did you consult with your children? I looked at Patricia and Brandon. No. Because it's my money, my decision, and I'm 62 years old. I don't need permission from my children to donate to charity. Robert walked me through everything. The initial estate conversation. The phone calls questioning my memory. Brandon showing up with medical power of attorney documents. The pressure to sell my house. The assisted living facility tour. The careful creation of a narrative that I was declining. Then he asked, Mrs. Chen, why did you record your conversations with your children? Because they were telling other people I was forgetting things, confusing dates, making mistakes, things that weren't true. I needed proof that I wasn't the person they were describing. I needed evidence of what was really happening. And what was really happening? I was being manipulated. Systematically, deliberately manipulated into thinking I couldn't trust my own memory, my own judgment, my own decisions. Ashford's cross-examination was brutal. He tried to paint me as paranoid, vindictive, emotionally unstable. He brought up the restaurant scene. Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you staged a public confrontation with your children specifically to humiliate them? No, I said clearly. I told them what I was planning to do with my own money. Their response, their anger, their cruelty, their sense of entitlement, that was all them. I didn't make them act that way. I just gave them an opportunity to show who they really were. So you admit you were testing them? I was protecting myself. I wanted witnesses to their true motivations. And I got them. Mrs. Chen, do you think it's normal for a mother to secretly record her children? To hire private investigators to follow them? To stage public confrontations? I looked directly at Judge Rodriguez. I think it's necessary when those children are trying to take away your freedom. I think it's survival when your own family is treating you like an obstacle to be removed. I think it's self-defense when the alternative is losing everything you've worked for and being declared incompetent for the crime of wanting to help others. Ashford tried a few more angles, but I didn't waver. Because I was telling the truth, and the truth doesn't change based on how questions are asked. Then Robert dropped the bomb. Your Honor, I'd like to present additional evidence. Audio recordings of the petitioners discussing their true motivations for this conservatorship petition. Ashford shot to his feet. Objection. Defense counsel hasn't disclosed any such recordings. They were disclosed in our opposition filing, Counselor, Robert said calmly. Section 4, paragraph 12. Perhaps you should read more carefully. Judge Rodriguez checked her own copy of the filing. Overruled. I'll allow it. Robert played the bar conversation first. The one Lisa Chong had recorded with the PI equipment. The audio quality was crystal clear. Brandon's voice filled the courtroom. If she gives away half to some charity, we're screwed. Do you know how much I need for the Miami deal? Patricia's response. The foundation idea is insane. That's our inheritance. Dad built that business for us, not for some random immigrant women to waste on failed business ventures. I watched Patricia's face drain of color. I watched Brandon close his eyes. The recording continued. So what's the play? We get her declared incompetent. File for conservatorship. I've already talked to Judge Morrison, not directly obviously but through channels. What if she fights it? She won't. She's old, emotional, isolated. Mom will fold. She always does. The courtroom was silent except for the recording. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, just listening. We've been laying the groundwork for weeks. Everyone who knows her has heard us express concern about her memory, her confusion. We've got documentation. What does that look like to a judge? It looks like a stubborn old woman who can't recognize her own decline. The recording ended. Judge Rodriguez's expression was unreadable, but her jaw was tight. Your Honor, Robert said, that recording was made 3 days before the restaurant incident. It clearly demonstrates that this conservatorship petition has nothing to do with protecting Mrs. Chen and everything to do with controlling her assets. Ashford was frantically whispering with Patricia. She was shaking her head, her face red. Robert played the restaurant recording next. Every vicious word, every insult, every moment of their mask slipping. The judge heard Patricia screaming that everything I had was because of them. She heard Brandon telling me not to come crying to them when I ended up alone. She heard their contempt, their entitlement, their cruelty. When the recording ended, Judge Rodriguez looked at Patricia and Brandon like they were something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Robert called character witnesses for me. Longtime business associates who testified to my sharp mind and sound judgment. Community members from the Asian Women's Business Initiative who talked about my vision and clarity. My sister Linda, who cried on the stand while describing how Patricia and Brandon had always been selfish but she'd never thought they'd go this far. The final witness was Margaret Chen's financial advisor, James Wu, who walked through my entire financial plan. He demonstrated that donating 60% to charity still left me with over $1 million in assets, plus ongoing business income, more than enough for any care needs I might have. Is this financial plan irrational in your professional opinion? Robert asked. Not at all. It's actually quite conservative. Mrs. Chen will have more than adequate resources for the next 30 to 40 years, even with significant medical expenses. The charitable donations are structured to maximize tax benefits while ensuring her own security. It's one of the most thoughtfully planned estates I've worked with. Robert called me back to the stand for one more round of questions. Mrs. Chen, why do you think your children filed this petition? I looked at Patricia and Brandon. Really looked at them. These two people I'd carried in my body, nursed at my breast, raised through tantrums and homework and heartbreaks. These two people I'd loved more than I'd loved myself for most of my adult life. Because they love money more than they love me, I said quietly. Because they see me as a means to an end rather than as a person. Because somewhere along the way I failed to teach them that people have value beyond what they can provide financially. My voice cracked. I gave them everything. I worked myself to exhaustion to give them opportunities one never had. I paid for their education, their first homes, their children's expenses. I never asked for anything back except respect. Except to be seen as a person, not a bank account. I wiped my eyes. And when I told them I wanted to use some of my money to help others, people who needed it the way I once needed it, they didn't see generosity. They saw theft. They saw me taking away what they'd already claimed as theirs. Judge Rodriguez was watching me intently. Mrs. Chen, if this conservatorship is granted, what would that mean for you? It would mean the end of my life as I know it. Not my physical life, but everything that makes me who I am. My independence. My dignity. My right to make my own choices. They'd move me to assisted living whether I wanted to go or not. They'd control my money, my medical care, my daily life. I'd become a thing to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I'm not declining. I'm not confused. I'm not being manipulated. I'm a woman who built an empire from nothing, who survived in a country where I didn't speak the language, who created something meaningful that will outlast me. And my children want to take that away because I won't give them everything they want. The only thing declining is my relationship with my children. And that's not because of my age or my cognition. It's because they've shown me exactly who they are and I've finally believed them. Robert had no more questions. Ashford tried one more cross-examination, tried to shake my testimony, tried to make me seem emotional and irrational. Mrs. Chen, isn't it true that you're just angry with your children and using your money to punish them? No, I said firmly. I'm using my money to help people. If my children see that as punishment, that says more about them than it does about me. He gave up. Judge Rodriguez called a recess. I'll review all evidence and render my decision when we reconvene in 1 hour. The longest hour of my life. I sat in a small conference room with Robert and Linda, drinking terrible courthouse coffee and trying not to think about what would happen if we lost. If the judge decided that a woman who wanted to donate to charity must be incompetent. If Patricia and Brandon's connections and expensive lawyers and carefully constructed narrative won. We did everything right, Robert kept saying. We have the evidence. We have the truth. She'll see it. But I'd been in enough courtrooms to know that truth doesn't always win. Sometimes money wins. Sometimes connections win. Sometimes the person who tells the better story wins. 60 minutes that felt like 60 hours. Then the bailiff came to get us. Court was reconvening. Judge Rodriguez was already on the bench when we walked in. Her expression was unreadable. We stood. And I waited to find out if I was still a free person or if my children had succeeded in erasing me. Judge Rodriguez surveyed the courtroom with the kind of silence that makes your heart pound in your ears. I could hear Patricia breathing beside her lawyer. I could feel Linda's hand trembling in mine. I've reviewed all evidence presented today, Judge Rodriguez began, her voice measured and firm. Including testimony, medical evaluations, financial records, and the recordings submitted by the respondent. She paused, looking down at her notes. I've been on this bench for 20 years. In that time I've seen genuine cases of cognitive decline where conservatorship were necessary and compassionate. I've seen families torn apart by dementia, by strokes, by illnesses that truly robbed people of their capacity to make decisions. She looked up, her gaze moving between Patricia and Brandon. This is not one of those cases. Patricia's sharp intake of breath was audible. What this court has witnessed today is one of the clearest examples of financial exploitation I have encountered. Mrs. Margaret Chen is not incompetent. She is not confused. She is not declining. She is, by all objective measures, a sharp, capable woman in full possession of her mental faculties. Judge Rodriguez's voice hardened. What is in question, what is abundantly, painfully clear, is the motivation behind this petition. This conservatorship filing was not about protecting Mrs. Chen. It was about controlling her assets. It was about preventing her from making financial decisions that, while perfectly legal and rational, didn't align with her children's personal interests. She picked up a document from her desk. The recordings presented today are damning. They show premeditation. They show callous disregard for Mrs. Chen's well-being. They show two adult children who viewed their mother not as a person deserving respect, but as an obstacle to their inheritance. Brandon's lawyer started to stand. Judge Rodriguez held up her hand. I'm not finished. He sat. Patricia and Brandon Chen, you should be ashamed. Your mother came to this country with $300 and built a multi-million-dollar business. She put both of you through private school and college. She paid for your graduate degrees, your first homes, supported your families. And when she expressed a desire to use her money he earned, to help others the way she was once helped, you conspired to have her declared mentally incompetent. The judge's voice was ice. You didn't just betray your mother's trust. You attempted to rob her of her fundamental right to autonomy. You tried to erase her as a person and reduce her to an asset to be managed. Patricia was crying silently. Brandon was staring at the table, his jaw clenched. The petition for conservatorship is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Chen's mental competency is beyond question, and this court finds no basis whatsoever for the extreme measure of conservatorship. I felt my knees weaken. Linda squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. Furthermore, Judge Rodriguez continued, this court finds that the petition was filed in bad faith, with ulterior motives, and in a manner that wasted court resources and caused significant emotional harm to the respondent. She looked directly at Patricia and Brandon. You will pay Mrs. Chen's legal fees in full. That amounts to $47,000. You will also be subject to a restraining order preventing you from contacting Mrs. Chen regarding any financial, medical, or legal matters without her explicit written consent. Any future contact must be purely personal in nature and initiated by Mrs. Chen herself. Patricia stood up, her voice breaking. Your Honor, please, she's our mother. Your mother, Judge Rodriguez said sharply, whom you tried to have declared incompetent so you could control her money. Sit down, Ms. Chen. Patricia sat, tears streaming down her face. This restraining order will remain in effect for a minimum of 2 years. Any violation will result in contempt charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Patricia whispered. Brandon said nothing. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted in muted chaos. Linda was hugging me, crying. Robert was shaking my hand, grinning broadly. Patricia's lawyer was already packing up his briefcase, clearly wanting to distance himself from the disaster. I looked across the aisle. Patricia was still sitting, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. Brandon was on his phone, his face red, probably already calling someone to complain, to spin this, to find a way to make himself the victim. Jessica, Brandon's wife, approached me cautiously. She'd sat through the entire trial looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Margaret," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know it had gone this far. Brandon told me you were just being difficult about estate planning. He never told you he wanted to have me declared incompetent and take control of my life?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry, just tired. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "The kids, your grandkids, they're devastated. They saw the videos online. They heard what their dad said. Emma and Jack have been crying for days." Emma and Jack. 14 and 12. The youngest two. The ones who used to beg to spend weekends at my house. "Are they here?" I asked. Jessica nodded toward the back of the courtroom. I turned and saw them sitting with their older cousins. Patricia's kids, Tyler and Sophia, 17 and 16. All four of them looked pale and miserable. I walked over slowly. Linda and Robert hung back, giving me space. The kids stood up as I approached. Emma's eyes were red and swollen. "Grandma," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know we didn't know." I pulled her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing. Jack joined the hug, and then Sophia and finally Tyler, all of them clinging to me like they used to when they were small. "It's not your fault," I told them. "None of this is your fault. We should have defended you," Tyler said, his voice thick. "At the restaurant. We just stood there with our phones filming like it was entertainment. We should have told them to stop. You were put in an impossible position," I said, pulling back to look at all four of them. "Your parents are adults. They made their choices. You're not responsible for those choices. Can we?" Emma wiped her eyes. "Can we still see you? Are you going to disappear from our lives?" I looked at their faces. These children I'd held as babies. These kids I'd taught to bake cookies and helped with homework and cheered for at school plays. "That's up to you," I said honestly. "And up to your parents, I suppose. The restraining order means your mom and dad can't contact me about financial or legal things. But if you want to see me, if you want to have a relationship with your grandmother, I would love that. More than anything." "We do," Jack said immediately. "We really do. Then we'll figure it out." I touched his face gently. "I love you, all of you." That never changed. Behind them I saw Brandon watching. His expression was unreadable. Anger, maybe, or shame, or just the blank look of someone realizing they'd lost something irretrievable. Patricia was being led out by her husband, Tom. She glanced back at me once, her face destroyed, then looked away. I felt, not triumph, not satisfaction, just a deep, aching sadness for what could have been and never would be again. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. The case had attracted attention. The viral videos, the dramatic testimony, the themes of elder abuse and family betrayal. Microphones thrust toward me as I emerged into the sunlight. "Mrs. Chen, how do you feel about the verdict? Mrs. Chen, will you reconcile with your children? Mrs. Chen, what message do you have for other elderly people facing similar situations?" Robert stepped forward to run interference, but I touched his arm. I wanted to say something. "I feel relieved," I said, my voice steady. "I feel vindicated. But mostly I feel sad. This should never have been necessary." The reporters leaned in. "This case isn't about revenge. It's not about punishing my children. It's about something much more fundamental. The right of elderly people to be treated as people. Not as bank accounts. Not as problems to be managed. Not as obstacles to inheritance." I took a breath. I'm one of the lucky ones. I had resources to fight back. I had a lawyer who believed me. I had evidence. But how many elderly people are facing this same situation right now without those advantages? How many are being pressured, manipulated, isolated, and controlled by family members who see them as a means to an end? A reporter called out, "Do you think your children love you?" I considered the question. I think they loved the version of me that gave them what they wanted. I think they loved having a mother who was useful, who paid bills, who babysat, who was there when they needed something. But love isn't supposed to be conditional. Love isn't supposed to evaporate the moment someone makes a choice you disagree with. Will you forgive them? I don't know, I said honestly. Forgiveness isn't something you can force. Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean letting them back into my life in the same way. They've shown me who they are. I believe them now. One more question. What happens to your estate now? I smiled slightly. Exactly what I always planned. 60% goes to the Asian Women's Business Initiative to help immigrant women entrepreneurs. The remaining 40% will be divided between my grandchildren's education trusts and a small amount for my sister Linda. My children are both financially successful professionals. They don't need my money. But women arriving in this country with nothing but hope? They do. The reporters scribbled furiously. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Robert guided me to his car, Linda close behind. As we pulled away from the courthouse, I saw Patricia and Brandon emerging from a side entrance, trying to avoid the media. They looked small, diminished. I felt no pleasure in it. My house was full of voices and laughter. 12 young women filled my living room, the first cohort of the Chen David Immigrant Women's Business Initiative. They ranged from 22 to 45 from 8 different countries, each with a business plan and a dream and the kind of determined fire I recognized from my own reflection 40 years ago. We met twice a month. I mentored them on business planning, financing, navigating American systems, handling setbacks. Other successful businesswomen volunteered as guest speakers. We'd established a microloan fund. We'd created a network. It was the best work I'd ever done. So you told the bank officer that you already had a co-signer? I was saying to Yuki, a Japanese woman starting a restaurant. And what did he say? He said it wasn't sufficient because it was my husband and my husband's credit was tied to mine, Yuki said, frustrated. It made no sense. He just kept saying no. Then you go to a different bank, I said. You find someone who actually looks at your business plan instead of making assumptions. Teresa, I gestured to one of our guest mentors, a Mexican woman who owned a chain of bakeries. Where did you get your first business loan? Teresa launched into her story and I sat back watching these women support each other, challenge each other, learn from each other. This was what mattered. The doorbell rang. Linda, who was helping serve snacks in the kitchen, answered it. I heard her voice, surprised and cautious. Oh. Come in. I turned to see Emma and Jack standing nervously in my foyer, Emma holding a large envelope. The business meeting paused. The women looked curious. I'm sorry, Emma said quickly. We didn't know you had people over. We can come back. No, stay. I stood smiling. Everyone, these are 2 of my grandchildren, Emma and Jack. Emma, Jack, these are my ments from the business initiative. The women called out greetings. Emma and Jack waved awkwardly. We have about 15 more minutes in our session, I told the kids. Can you wait? There's food in the kitchen. Linda will take care of you. They nodded and followed Linda out. I returned to the discussion, but my heart was full. The kids had been visiting every few weeks. Sometimes for a few hours, sometimes for dinner, once for an entire weekend. They never mentioned their parents. I never asked. It wasn't the relationship we used to have. It was something newer, more careful. But it was real. After the Ments left, with hugs and promises to have their financial projections ready for next meeting, I found Emma and Jack at the kitchen table. They'd helped Linda clean up. So, I said, sitting down with them, what's in the envelope? Emma pushed it across the table. Jack and I wrote you letters. We've been working on them for weeks. We wanted to explain everything. How we felt. What we've learned. How sorry we are. You don't need to apologize, I started. We do, Jack interrupted. His voice was firm. He was growing up, getting more confident. We stood by and watched our parents treat you like garbage. We didn't speak up. We were so focused on what we'd get from you that we never thought about what you needed from us. Emma nodded. We thought we had time. We thought you'd always be there. And we thought, her voice cracked, we thought being your grandkids meant we automatically deserved your love and your money without actually treating you with respect. I felt tears sting my eyes. The thing is, Emma continued, Mom and Dad are still acting like they're the victims. They keep telling anyone who'll listen that you're vindictive, that you turned us against them, that this is all about control. But we were there. We saw what they did. We heard what they said. We choose you, Jack said simply. We choose you, Grandma. Not because of money. We know you're giving most of it to charity, and that's exactly what you should do. But because you're kind and strong, and you deserve to have people in your life who love you for who you are. I couldn't speak. I reached across the table and grabbed both their hands. Tyler and Sophia feel the same way, Emma added. But Mom won't let them come over. She says if they visit you, they're betraying her. She's trying to make them choose. And what did they say? I asked. Tyler graduates this year, Emma said. He told Mom that the day he turns 18 he's coming to see you whether she likes it or not. Sophia's counting down the days until she can do the same. Pride swelled in my chest. My grandchildren. Standing up. Finding their own voices. Your parents aren't bad people, I said carefully. They're hurt people. They're scared people. Somewhere along the way they learned to measure their worth by money and status instead of by character and love. I failed them in that. I gave them everything material and somehow didn't teach them what actually matters. That's not your fault, Emma said fiercely. They're adults. They made their choices. Maybe, I said. But I still love them. I probably always will. That's the terrible thing about being a mother. You love your children even when they break your heart. Even when they betray you. You just love them differently afterward. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. So, I said, changing the subject. Tell me about school. Tell me about your lives. Tell me everything I've missed. And they did. A week later I drove to the cemetery. It was a clear morning, the kind David always loved. Bright sun, slight breeze, everything sharp and defined. His headstone was simple. David Chen. Beloved husband, father, grandfather. He built with love. I sat in the grass beside it, placing fresh flowers in the built-in vase. So, I said out loud. It's done. The court case. The whole mess. We won. Well, I won. I don't think anybody really won, honestly. A bird landed nearby, cocked its head at me, then flew off. Patricia and Brandon hate me. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they just hate that they can't control me anymore. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever really know what they feel. But the grandkids are coming around. Not all of them yet, but 2 for sure, and the other 2 are waiting. The wind rustled the flowers. Remember when you were dying? Those last few weeks. You kept trying to tell me something, but you were so weak on so much morphine. You'd grab my hand and say, protect yourself first. I thought you meant financially. Make sure the estate was in order, make sure I'd be okay. I touched his headstone. But that's not what you meant, was it? You meant protect my heart. Protect my dignity. You knew, somehow you knew, that they'd come after me when you were gone. You knew I'd have to fight. And you were trying to tell me it was okay. That I didn't have to sacrifice myself for them anymore. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I miss you. God, David, I miss you every single day. You would have handled this better. You would have known what to say to them, how to make them understand. You always knew how to reach them when I couldn't. But even as I said it, I wondered if it was true. David had been a wonderful father. Loving, present, supportive. But he'd also given them everything they asked for. He'd bailed Brandon out of bad investments. He'd used his connections to help Patricia's career. Had we created this? Had our generosity somehow taught them that their wants would always be met, their needs always prioritized, their inheritance already theirs? I'm not giving them the money, I said firmly. I'm not changing my mind. The Women's Initiative is launching next month. Full operations. We've got 12 businesses in the first cohort, and 20 more applications for the second. We're changing lives, David. Real lives. Women who came here like I did with nothing but hope. I smiled through my tears. You'd love them. There's a woman from Somalia who wants to start a food truck. A girl from Guatemala who designs jewelry. A Ukrainian woman who does computer programming. They're brilliant and brave and they deserve a chance. The sun was warm on my face. Patricia called yesterday. Left a voicemail. First time in 3 months. He was crying. Said she was sorry, said she'd lost her way, said she wanted to fix things. I haven't called back. I don't know if I will. I paused, considering. Maybe eventually. When I'm ready. When she's really ready. But not now. Now I'm just trying to figure out who I am without you. Who I am without them. Who I am when I'm not defined by being someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's bank account. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting. I think you'd be proud of me. I hope you would be. I fought back, David. I didn't go quietly. I didn't let them erase me. I touched the headstone one more time. I love you. I'll always love you. But I'm learning to love myself too. Finally. I walked back to my car, my heart heavy but also somehow lighter. 6 months after the trial, I was featured in a local business magazine, Margaret Chen, from immigrant to empire builder to philanthropist. The article included photos of me with the Women's Initiative participants. It mentioned the trial only briefly in the context of overcoming family challenges to focus on her legacy. Patricia sent me a copy with a note. I saw this. You look happy. I'm glad. I'm still sorry. Maybe someday we can talk. Love, Patricia. I kept the note. Brandon never reached out. The initiative grew. In the first year we helped launch 23 businesses. 8 of them were profitable within 6 months. 2 failed, but the women learned and pivoted. 1 became successful enough that the owner herself became a donor to the program. My house was rarely quiet. There were always meetings, mentoring sessions, young women stopping by with questions or just for tea and conversation. Emma and Jack visited weekly. Tyler came the day he turned 18, and Sophia started calling every Sunday. Patricia didn't stop them anymore. She'd given up that battle. I dated briefly, a nice widower from my Tai Chi class, but decided I preferred my independence. After 40 years of putting someone else first, I was learning to put myself first. It was harder than it sounded. On my 63rd birthday, all 4 grandchildren surprised me with a cake and a photo album they'd made. It was full of pictures from their childhood. Me at school plays, at birthday parties, teaching them to cook, reading stories. The inscription on the first page: to the strongest woman we know. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. We're sorry it took us so long to see it. I cried until my face hurt. That evening, alone in my house with the photo album open on my lap, I realized something. I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not the complicated happiness that comes from compromise and sacrifice. Not the exhausting happiness of always putting others first. Just happy. Happy in my work. Happy in my relationships with my grandchildren. Happy in my home. Happy in my own skin. I'd fought for this. I'd stood up in a courtroom and claimed my right to exist as a full person, not as someone's convenient resource. I'd looked my children in the eye and said, I love you, but I love myself too. And that has to be enough. It wasn't the life I'd imagined. I'd thought I'd grow old surrounded by my children, babysitting grandchildren, being the matriarch everyone gathered around at holidays. Instead, I was the matriarch of a different kind of family, one built not on blood but on choice, not on obligation but on mutual respect. And you know what? It was enough. More than enough. It was exactly the life I was supposed to have. They thought I was too old to fight back. Too tired. Too emotional. Too attached to the idea of family to actually stand up for myself. They were wrong. Age didn't make me weak. It made me wise. It taught me that dignity isn't negotiable. That respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you demand. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries and enforce them. I didn't humiliate my family in court. They humiliated themselves. I just refused to be erased while they did it. To anyone watching this who's facing something similar, whether you're being manipulated by family, controlled by adult children, or just made to feel like you're a burden, hear me. You're not too old. You're not too tired. You are not too alone. Your life is yours. Your choices are yours. Your dignity is yours. And anyone who can't respect that doesn't deserve access to you, no matter how much DNA you share. I'm 63 years old. I came to this country with $300 and a dream. I built an empire. I raised a family. And when that family tried to take everything from me, I fought back. Not with anger. Not with revenge. But with the simple, radical act of refusing to disappear. And I won. Not because I destroyed them, but because I saved myself. Margaret Chen continues to run the Chen David Immigrant Women's Business Initiative, which has now helped launch over 100 businesses. She maintains relationships with all 4 of her grandchildren. She has had limited contact with Patricia and no contact with Brandon. She recently published a memoir titled, The Price of Family. When asked if she regrets the way things turned out, she said, I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret protecting myself. Not for a second.